Okay, I think we can take off. So thank you, first of all, for this wonderful opportunity to Daniel, Isabel, Maya, Joseph, Mayari, first of all, and everybody, Tacita, for being here.
Yeah, thank you too.
Isabel has already mentioned that the work we will be talking about, Antigone, is very complex. And I will just try to find a trajectory through it so that those of you who've seen the film might learn or gain or get interested in something, but also those of you who haven't seen it. Tacita, let me begin with Antigone, which is, of course, a huge project reaching from the antique mythology to antique philosophy and then onwards through the ages to your family, as many people will have read or heard already. I will try to focus on a couple of issues, but always try to talk about your artistic procedures, because that's all I can sort of ask questions about. Should we maybe start with the issue of blindness and see how that the different aspects of blindness, of Oedipus and so forth, end up with the blindness of cinema and your take on the old analog cinema? How did you start working with those images?
Well, it wasn't like I began thinking about blindness as a sort of major motif in this at all. The genesis was Antigone, my sister's name, and obviously also Antigone, the Sophoclean heroine. And then at a certain point, because for those that don't know, obviously Antigone was a word I must have said as a child. I mean, I still call her Antigone. I'm the only one, actually, who does. She gets called Tiggy by everyone else. But anyway, the point is, I still call her Antigone. So Antigone became just a word, and then at a certain point, the word has meaning. So when I was at undergraduate, I was even making things with the word Antigone and Oedipus, and this carried on for many, many years. And then in 1997, I was invited to make a film, to write a script for the Sundance Screenwriting Lab. And I came up with the idea of making it around Antigone. And I suppose the blindness, which of course is implicit in the fact that Oedipus blinded himself and was led in the wilderness by Antigone for, we don't know how long, triggered all these other blindnesses, my own blindness, my inability to really work in that linear narrative way, in a cinematic linear narrative way. Because the Sundance Screenwriting Lab, and I came as an anomaly anyway. They were trying to jazz it up, so they decided to invite, an artist and a poet. We were sort of kind of guinea pigs, really. And they said, do you have an idea for a script? And I, no. And then they gave me a weekend, and for some reason I just came up with the idea of trying to write or make a film about the gap between the end of Oedipus Rex and the beginning of Oedipus at Colonus, which would be a sort of dialogue between father and daughter, which is this period of time with, with Antigone and Oedipus in the wilderness. And, they thought, so that's a great narrative idea. And I spent, I had amazing people I spoke with, but it was very much in the three-act cinematic tradition, and, the narrative structure, and how do you begin, and how do you get to the next act, and, and they all had, and these were great screenwriters, but they had very specific ideas of, it was all very kind of, you're in Antigone and Oedipus are in the hotel, they just, what happens if they, it was really kind of put into this kind of, you could just see it as Hollywood cinema. And of course, I was very young, and I left thinking, I'm going to make a feature film, and I never could. So that was a sort of blindness, and there's Oedipus's blindness, and then the medium kicked in with the blindness of, particularly my way of making a film with the aperture gate masking technique, and then it became also the blindness of nature with the eclipse. So all these blindnesses accumulated.
Just for those of you to remind you, we have on the one hand Antigone of Sophocles, where the daughter, against the law of the tyrant Creon, chooses to bury her brother. And it is actually a story which always touches me a lot if I read it, even in Sophocles, even if we don't know how different the translations are. I have seen that the English translation is much more readable than what we usually read in German, Hölderlin, which is very strange in 19th century. And then we have the old story, which we all know, and then at some ramifications we don't really know it. I always realize of Oedipus, who sort of runs into his fate. Maybe you remember the wonderful film of Pasolini too, where he sort of turns around at the crossroads and then always chooses to walk into his tragedy, so to say. And those are stories that sort of work in a linear mode, and what we see with Tacita's artwork is a very complex, interwoven sort of dealing with life and death, order and disorder, law and the transgression, and things like that. So just to remind you, what we are talking about here is a huge complex of human questions, and the idea of putting this into not just a film, but a ramification of images is the first step we're faced with. And then you sort of address the idea of blindness in cinema itself. Maybe you could explain that a little. Why should cinema itself have such a strong blind spot, or several blind spots, and what is interesting in the medium there for you?
Okay. I just wanted to say, before I talk about film and the making of film, I wanted to say a bit about Oedipus and his fate, because I think it's very, very important about, the whole point about Oedipus and the fate of everybody. A lot of people in ancient Greece was that they were always informed of their fate by Delphi, the oracle at Delphi. So at a certain point, what comes first? The oracle or the fate? There's something trickster in the oracle, which I always think. And the point about Antigone, the word, of course, brings the name, brings about her own tragedy. But of course, the bit between the plays predates her own tragedy. Is this moment of kind of potential sort of intimacy with her father, but because of his crime, also his sister. Because you all know that Oedipus married his mother and killed his father on the crossroads that Ute was talking about. So it's it's a complicated story, but in a way, for me, those things percolated up from the ground, just like in Yellowstone. But what's the one thing in the film is just the word Antigone, and Anne Carson picks at it and starts talking about. I mean, it's kind of she's an extraordinary person in terms of her analysis of it. But in relation to what your question was about film, obviously, I work with photochemical film, and which is a blind medium because you can't see. This only makes sense in the digital universe because it used to be the normal way to make an image was photographic through photochemical, so it was always blind for everyone. But now everyone can see what they're doing the whole time. And for me, it's a bit like having the lights on the whole time. And the point about film is that it's still made in a dark room. You know, camera is a room. You know, it's a dark room. So all this stuff goes on in the dark room, and only when you, process the film do you turn the lights on and you see what you've done. You know, that's basically what it is. And especially with a film like Antigone, which is entirely made in this dark room. Mm-hmm. You know, so, and I started filming in January in 2017, and, you know, with the aperture gate masking system, which is basically a way of filming inside the camera, on the film frame in many different parts, but without seeing what you're doing, which no one can get their heads around, but it's totally true. So, began in London with, first of all printing the sprockets, which is the sort of arena on the film, and then put take the film, put it in a can, and then go down to Cornwall and film, in Cornwall, and Stephen Delane down there as Oedipus, who he dresses up as Oedipus. And then I'd, literally, without seeing what we'd done, put the film back in cans and carry those cans unexposed to Wyoming, and first to Illinois, and just build up the image that way. So, and then with the final thing was the eclipse. So it was incredibly perilous way to make images, but if you trust in it, it will give you something more beautiful than you can possibly make if you can see what you're doing. So the blindness is very instructive. I have to trust in it.
And the idea of time. So I had the idea that you're consciously working with film in a way that while you're shooting, you don't see, and only once, months or even years later, when you expose it, or sometimes months, usually weeks and months later, if you expose it, then you see what you would have seen before. That also corresponds so much to the idea of Oedipus, who sort of leads his life, and only when Tiresias comes up and tells him what he has produced as his own life has been the hugest crime ever, that suddenly life is exposed to him as if it was a film in post-production or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I really like, that you're using that. Yeah. And just maybe to explain to those who haven't seen it, what Tacita does is she belichtet, she exposes certain regions of the film material, and then she winds it back, and then she, in a process which is called masking, she will expose the other parts, and so get chance, an aleatoric principle, into the film itself. A sort of not knowing, a sort of blind spot, if I see it correctly. So you yourself are sort of not meandering, but...
No, I write, in the essay that I wrote about it eventually, that not only did I blind the camera, but I also lamed it, because made it lame, because, this process is so complicated that, I couldn't be agile with the camera at all. So, because you're so disciplined with, because 35 millimeter film has 4 sprockets on it. And if you mark a frame, a few frames, so you know which of these 4 sprockets makes the film frame. If you're one sprocket out, you ruin the whole film. Mm. So because the next thing you print on it will be off. Yeah. An unexposed film is black, so you just get a black line. So we were so disciplined. We had this incredible crew, and particularly this woman, this camera woman called Kate Schmerziak, who was she just terrorized everyone. So there was no spontaneity at all. Yeah. it was just like, oh my God, look. Yeah. And it's just like, no, I'm sorry, I'm counting frames.
Yeah.
And, and it drove my cameraman crazy. Couldn't stand it. Yeah. But she insisted, and because of her rigor, we got, if she'd, in any way let him, we wouldn't have got that level of accuracy. But you have to understand that I had about 50 cans that I carried from London via Thebes, Illinois, to Wyoming, with little empty bits in every frame, which was waiting for the eclipsing sun. So we had to be so drilled. You have no idea. It's something that, it made everyone's heads hurt. And this is a, generation who nowadays have to be on, digital film shoots where they just put in a card and just sit.
Well, it's not that easy, because you have to have an administration of those numbers of the digital, which is also not so.
You mean the video village?
You have to have discipline, otherwise you
but it's not on a par. It's not on a par.
It's different. But I thought that this idea of order and disorder that you were now describing is again something that is, of course, also the issue of Antigone in herself. The transgressing the order and at the same time insisting on order is also a way of your artistic procedure. And
I mean, it's true that it's a mix of courting chaos, which is what I do, and then having to, you're right, insist on systems.
I have a very simple question. In the projection, we see the sprockets. We see the 4 perforating holes, right and left of the image, but obviously they are not operational. They are sort of symbolic, and they don't move, they don't work, because usually they are hidden in order to make the film move, 24 frames per second, and here they are just shown. And here's a very simple question. I couldn't really make sense of which images are sort of in the sprockets. I thought they were making a sort of quotation mark.
Well, it was
image. I didn't understand.
I mean, it's only because that was actually, when I began thinking about it, it was like a 70 millimeter, it's actually 70 millimeter proportion. Mm-hmm. So it's a sort of 70 millimeter filmscape. And the whole premise behind the film at the very beginning was about my inability to make a linear narrative film. So everything that happens inside the sprockets is sort of cinematic space, and everything that happens outside of it, like the courtroom scene, is or the bits of sunset that are just an aside, are more sort of kind of analytical or of it, outside of the narrative. So, Oedipus, Stephen Delane, who, by the way, blinds himself with eclipse glasses. Mm-hmm. He is dressing up as Oedipus, so he's inside the cinematic space. And then, when he's in the courtroom with Anne Carson and me, he's outside of it. So that was the sort of notion of it. Mm-hmm. But the original, funnily enough, the whole thing became, the genesis to make this work was because I'd been carrying this around my entire life, but particularly for the last 20 years or more now, but from 97 to 2007, because of this, that I'd gone to Sundance, I'd had this extraordinary experience, I'd spoken to these, real old school cinema professionals, and they gave me this incredible gift to go and, write to instruct me how to write a film script, and I totally couldn't do it. And why can't I do it? I write, so why can't I write a film script? What is stopping me? And I realize what it is that I can only work in the blind way that I and that came about. And in the end, I sort of not only blinded it, I double blinded it, because I made it too films, 2 eyes, left and right, which completely could never be theatrically projected. So it was my way of saying I can't do it. And because in my life I make films, so people say to me, so when are you going to make your feature film, love? And I just can't do it. Why can't I do that? I mean, what's stopping me? And the reason is something really deep that came up through my utter failure. Antigone is about the utter failure to think in linear narrative, but to turn it around thinking, why can't I do what those people do? Why am I not interested enough to do it? And I realize it's because I need the blindness to propel myself forward. And it's really interesting, but I somehow do.
Yeah, but you're using that blindness very systematically. I mean, that is probably the difference between you as an artist or all of us who use blindness every day to sort of get through. But that systematic way is really admirable, as I have to say. Maybe we should, because you, on the one hand, you have that systematic blindness and the aleatoric or the chance coming in, as Oedipus has, but then you also have many images of vapors, of fogs, of noise. One could
Frogs.
say of fogs, not frogs. Okay. Fogs.
Aristophanes. I was getting confused.
I didn't see frogs. Maybe there are.
No, there aren't any. That's what I was checking.
No. It's fogs and the moors and the vapors that you obviously relate to another principle of.
Well, the truth about it's a very mysterious thing because.
Clouds. I forgot clouds.
Clouds, yeah. I like clouds generally, but with what happened with the Yellowstone, because of course a lot of it is filmed in Yellowstone, and that's the vapors, it was almost, it actually was an accident. I watched years ago a panorama program on the supervolcano at Yellowstone that's going to wipe us out. And always been sort of, very, very low level, terrified of that extinction that's happening in Wyoming, potentially. And I always wanted to go there. And then when I found out about the Great American Eclipse in 2017, I looked at a map and I thought, oh my God, it's going through Yellowstone. I can go and film the eclipse in Yellowstone. And then, started the whole organization of filming the eclipse. And at a certain point realized that it's actually about 3 hours drive from Yellowstone, or even more, actually. I can't remember. And but somehow Yellowstone stayed on the trajectory. And at a certain point, people said, well, why are we going to Yellowstone? And I had said, well, it was a mistake, actually, but I'm kind of glad. And then I realized why it's so important to the film because of Pythia and the Oracle of Delphi. I mean, she reads she's the priestess in the Oracle, and she reads the vapors that come up from the ground and interprets them. But because of Antigone is so much to do with what's underneath everything, and it's about undercurrents and under the earth and the manifestations that appear through fate and through chance, and it made perfect sense that I should have gone there, but actually it wasn't like you see, this is what I can't communicate enough, but it's kind of true. I really don't know what I'm doing. And some people will testify to that, but I really don't know what I'm doing, do I? So it's like, and then things happen, and of course, it's completely clear I knew what I was doing. But it's a confusion.
You always need two people who don't know what they're doing, and then it makes sense again. Like you have Oedipus who's blind, and you have Tiresias. And if two people are blind, then something comes out of that. So that's why they invited me. I don't know anything about those things. But I think that vapor thing is very strong in the film, and it sort of supports the theory, I think, that they say Sophocles, in writing Oedipus, the trilogy, sort of establishes a new idea of the law. You have that old law of the trance-like prophecies, sometimes correlated to matriarchy and some feminist thing. And on the other hand, you have the democratic, clear Greek logic coming in with a new form of law. And then what you do is you lead us back into the old courthouse of Theban.
But that again by chance. Because I just Googled, Anne Carson couldn't come to, Thebes in Greece. So I just Googled Thebes, and I found Thebes, Illinois. And the only thing in Thebes, Illinois, apart from a trailer park and a bridge over the Mississippi, is a courthouse. It was just because I Googled Thebes, Illinois. And suddenly I'm in a courthouse. You have no idea of this is what I mean about the vapors that are, because, I'm in a courthouse, and my father was a judge, and I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing in a courthouse? But somehow, and my father, the judge, chose Antigone. He chose the name. So it's so cyclical and weird, all this stuff that just got churned up. But yes, it's
and you're in that courthouse scene, which is quite complex again, because we have 4 courthouse scenes working in a parallel sort of trilogue, fourlogue. I don't know. How many? And instead of having a single law exposed to us, explaining something about what's going on in the Oedipus trilogy, you sort of have a lot of associations, talks, ideas, meandering through the images. What did you think you were doing?
It was a hard day, I have to say, because I never want to be in my films. But I had one day with Anne and Stephen in the courthouse, and we decided to use what we call the non-aperture, the non-sprocketed films, so the open gate, we call it. But with open gate masking, which means, there was diagonal, parabola, all these things, or half. But what you don't realize is that you start talking in one half of a triangle of a film. And my cameraman just said, I can't keep you out of it. It's impossible. So you basically embed in the emulsion half of this conversation. And then that film gets taken out, another one gets put in, and so you have lots and lots of halves. And then you put the other, you put the other half in, and you do something else on the other half. You have no idea, of course, what's on the other half. And
it seems a little like a sphinx again.
Yeah,
with many questions and many answers, but the answers never fit the questions. And
yes, no, I know, but the most amazing thing happened.
Yeah. And then confusion, and out of that confusion, something...
Well, comes some sort of clarity. But when I first looked at it, I thought, oh, God, this is just incomprehensible. And but it was blah, 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 blah. And then when I not only did I doubled that, because then I had the thing twice. But what happens is it became the chorus, actually. But a chorus that doesn't speak with a single voice, but with, 4. And if you allow yourself to listen to it, you just pick up things from, and you create your own sort of kind of understanding of something of what's going on. And there's things that all these things they also come out. But for me, it is a moment of absolute cacophony. And then it's bang, and it's gone. And it was a risk to even to shoot it in the first place, but it was even greater risk to put it in the film. But I think it's very, very important, even though it's...
Yeah, and there's a wonderful scene where you will probably know that Anne Carson is an excellent poet, but she's also an excellent translator, for instance, of the poems of Sappho. I think she's made the best translations ever on that material. And then suddenly, in that scene, she starts to dance.
Yes.
And I thought, why does she dance? But of course, in Greek poetry, poetry was a thing of, as we know in Basel, because we had Nietzsche, it is something of moving your legs, enjambement, as the French say. So Versfuß, it is in German. You even talk about the feet. You don't say meter, you say Versfuß. So she reminds us in that little dance that actually a good speech or a good poem is something of a movement. And that sticks out so much, but suddenly you hear the whole thing not as a cacophony so much, but as a symphony.
Yes, no. Yeah, that's nice, that I hadn't thought.
That's wonderful. But what about the law and the father? So since you were mentioning it, I cannot not hear it.
Well, the law and the father. Well, not sure I can. Well, the law and the father. I mean, the thing is it's all. I mean, it's all part of the fabric of the whole thing. And he named us.
There's a third child. But
Ptolemy. Yeah,
okay.
That's the next Maya. That's the next one. Antigone, Tacita, and Ptolemy.
So how do you evade that sort of name-giving law?
Okay, it's a huge power to give someone a name, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess my name means the silent one. And I remember being at art school and this woman lecturer saying, "You let him name you Silence?" I mean, you don't let anyone name you anything. Your choice is to rename yourself, but you are born with your name, and you can become your name.
Doesn't it also mean that the small
Cup.
one who? No,
No.
not the small cup. It's not. It's
Tacita.
not Tassa. It's Tacita. It's the small one who won't talk.
I don't know about that. She's the goddess of. She's mentioned in Ovid.
Okay. Yeah, that's more precise.
All I know of and goddess of sleep also.
Well, it becomes very obviously. It becomes very obvious that you are also putting the sound man, the sound person, into the film, as the one who you have in cinema. We have to be made to talk. We can't just talk. We have to have a sound man or a microphone. So it's very obvious that that you know about voice being given to a person, and I actually like that very much too. Can you talk about the sound level at all?
Well, the sound, I mean, the thing is for me, sound is extremely important because it's a fiction in film, which I don't think, people quite understand in the same way as, because we're so used to digital cameras and, that come with the sound attached. But film is a silent medium. You don't record film with sound. It records silence, and you record sound in a separate way. And the way you connect the sound with the image is with the clapperboard. It's a visual, like that, or a clap, and then you synchronize it. And I still do that. I actually still have my rushes, my mute rushes, and then my mag, and I spent hours trying to sync my films to my, and it's a labor, especially if a lot of the films I have, not Antigone, but other films, I don't want them to feel the self-consciousness of wearing a microphone or anything, so I don't mic up them, so I don't do clapperboard sometimes. And I can spend, days trying to work out this, trying to get the sync right. And but what it means is because of the silence of film, it allows for the fiction of sound. And this is one of the things I have about digital, is that you will watch it with sound, and you never hear it silent. not in its essence anyway. I mean, you can choose not to record sound, but people don't. And I think it's a very profound thing, the silence of film, because it means it turns you into an inventor of sound. And I use the fiction of sound a lot. With Antigone, obviously I had a sound recordist, but she also in TV Men she talks about the sound recordist and that's an important character in her poem, Anne Carson's poem, and I had this sound guy there. I just filmed him because of the mention in the poem actually. But it's beautiful because there's a moment that because it's of course two separate occasions that they're filmed. But when she talks about the sound man, I mean, literally the sun went in on him. And that's just the chance of film. That's what I mean. The miracle of the internal wizard inside the camera that will make, because I would never have knowingly done that, do you know what I mean? Or edited that together. But that's the profound thing of trusting in fate. To trusting in chance to do something that I could not do or would not knowingly or deliberately do. And that's what's so important about photochemical mediums, that there's still this ability to work a bit blindly, because I don't think we always are as good as we think we are. And sometimes when a medium does something, whether you're a painter and it does something you don't imagine or don't think about, and it makes you make another decision. I mean, all artists know about mediums. They know that they make them do things, and that's what film does. But if you see what you're doing the whole time, and I think this is a bit of a problem with digital cinema, is it's so clear that they've got 100% control over it, and it's a bit laboured. It is no, I don't know.
But I completely agree that you can work more materially with the analog film and the light, for instance. That's for sure. But the digital also needs to go into the material at some point. Otherwise, it would never be an image. It would just be numbers. I think it's a different medium.
It is a different medium. Yeah.
Medium.
I'm just trying to
Editing
stick up for my medium because your medium's winning.
If you edit your material, do you actually sit on a flatbed and work? Could you describe the time of editing?
Well, with Antigone particularly, because I was in Los Angeles, and I had to hire this Steenbeck, and it was the first time. The only Steenbeck I could find to hire was had a double. Little, because you have, you have two rolls for film, and you thread it, and you see a little screen, and that you can see the image, and then you have two for sound.
Just for those of you who don't know, Steenbeck is one of those old flatbeds where you can work editing, and you have big ones and small ones, and at some point they were all thrown out. You could get them for free at every corner.
Now they're really expensive. But the point is the one I could hire in LA had two little screens, two heads, and which was, and I just, of course, I'm used to just one little screen, and so I just worked on that for ages, and I was incredibly frustrated. I just couldn't get it to work, all my random bits of footage. And at a certain point, I realized, of course, I have to make it double. It's Antigone and Oedipus. It's a completely binary film. It's the sun and the moon. And as soon as I did, suddenly the Steenbeck became into its own. I could use both heads, and you could sync them together. And the whole process of cutting a film on a cutting table is that it is very laboured, and time is very embedded in the process. So you can't. There's no kind of click to the start of the film. You have to rewind the whole film to get to the front, and then you have to. It's just there's no economy, and it's just getting huge reels of film, and I get a sort of amnesia after I've made each film, so I don't even have any systems particularly. I have to sort of relearn it every time, which is probably also because I was never taught how to do it. I just taught myself. So, but it is a different way of, and it's very physical.
Yeah, and it's very lots of vapors, I feel, in film. That material smells, and then depending on what sort of glue you use, of course you have, don't you think? As opposed to the digital, which is very abstract and very...
Well, my film isn't very smelly, but it's...
You should keep it in the case more long than it.
No, I don't want vinegar syndrome. But in a lab, of course, it is. They do use chemicals still, but when you actually get the film, it's no longer the smell of film. I mean, it's. But I did stuck together with sellotape and Chinograph, and this is what I do entirely alone. And this is the heart of my process. This is when I'm a painter or a sculptor. This is it, and it's very solitary, and it takes a very, very long time. And that's how I make the work. And I don't have any pre-ideas of what it's going to be. I just have to work with what it is.
Actually, this was the first question I was going to ask. What's the different? And I forgot. What is the different time? Because obviously, if you draw or if you paint, that takes much longer than making an image as a photography or as filming, in fact. Do you have those different times in your working mode, in your working perception?
Why did you think it takes? It takes me months upon months to make a film. So of course you film in the moment, but with Antigone and my other aperture gate masking films, I'm not filming in the moment. I'm filming over in a very laboured, many, many moments, and it's only in the so that alone is already very kind of not a quick process. But the actual editing takes months upon months. So I don't think it's a time that's not so disconnected from the time it might take to make quite an epic painting. The time within Antigone, there are many times. There's the real clock is the total eclipse of the sun. This is the clock in the film. This is the one chronology that that I follow faithfully. Is the eclipsing of the sun, even if it's spread over many types and places of film. So
maybe one last question, which hopefully links to that. What I really liked about the project is that you were interested in the intermediate, in what happens between Oedipus Rex and Oedipus in Colonos, or even in the other one. What happens when they are wandering, when they are erring in the wilderness? What happens if they don't know where things lead to? Because I feel, there are many issues I felt that makes your Antigone film so important right now. But I feel especially that addressing a time when you don't know where it's going to lead to, when you don't know what the next law or judgment will be, when you don't know what your decisions will lead to. And then at one point you are mentioning that idea of Moses being in the desert, not getting into Israel, not getting out, and you say that was that saved them because the rebels or the Jews were able to forget the slavery. Is there something in that meandering and film that is related to, you're thinking of today's condition? Or could that also have happened 20 years ago when you first started working on Antigone?
It would be something completely else had I made it then. But that was such a beautiful idea of Stuart Stern. Why did it take so long? A journey that just could have taken, 6 weeks. Why did it take years for the Jews? And, it was just like because the generation had to die who had been slaves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an extremely profound idea, mm-hmm. that the memory had to die for them to be able to move into the future.
The embodiment of the memory had to die, even because thinking of Anne and her dancing, of the archive and the memory.
And I think of course, that is a very powerful, idea for today. I mean, well, probably for all time, maybe, is that you have to lose the memory of bondage or slavery or any sort of kind of Holocaust. Or it's a really, really profound idea. He had to. Why did it take so long? I mean, in terms of Oedipus, he had to forget his crime. He had to be able to arrive at Colonus in order to be resolved, cleaned is the word that Anne uses, to be cleaned of his crime so that he could be, he could die and be absolved and, be taken to because he just disappears. It's like, so I thought it was a very, powerful idea.
Oh, that's good. Maybe that circle of blindness and cinema and forgetting and then seeing again and then realizing the invisible, maybe that's the circle we can leave it at for the moment. Thank you so much, Tacita.
Thank you too.
That was wonderful.
No, thank you very much.
I learned a lot.
Thank you.